The morning mist clung to the riverbank like a living thing, and Owen Yates could barely see 10 feet ahead as he picked his way along the muddy shore, checking his fish traps by the pale light of a dawn that had not yet broken through the fog. He had walked this route every morning for 3 years since settling on the edge of the Redwater Valley, and he knew every rock and root by heart, which was why he stopped dead when he heard the sound that did not belong. A low, ragged breathing, punctuated by grunts of effort and what might have been curses in a language he did not fully understand. Owen set down his collection basket and moved toward the sound, his boots squelching in the wet earth. The fog parted just enough for him to see her, an orc woman, chest deep in the mudbank where the river curved sharply and deposited thick sediment that could trap anything unlucky enough to wander into it. Her green skin was slicked with mud and water, her dark hair plastered to her skull, and her eyes, when they met his, were wide with a mixture of exhaustion and defiance. She had clearly been struggling for some time, and the mud had her fast. One of her arms was free and braced against a partially submerged log, but the other was trapped beneath the surface, and her legs were invisible beneath the thick, sucking mire. For a moment, they simply stared at each other. Owen had seen orcs before, of course. There were clans in the mountains to the north, and occasionally traders came through the valley, though they were never made to feel welcome in the human settlements. This woman looked to be in her early 20s, with small tusks that curved up from her lower jaw and pointed ears that were currently flattened back against her head in what he thought might be distress. Her clothing, what he could see of it, was simple leather and wool now thoroughly ruined by the mud. "Do not come closer," she said, and her voice was hoarse, probably from calling for help that had not come. "I will get myself out." Owen looked at the mud, at the way it held her, at the trembling in the arm that braced against the log. "You have been trying for a while, I think." "That is not your concern, human." "Maybe not," Owen agreed, setting down the coil of rope he had been carrying for securing the traps. "But I am going to help you anyway, because if I leave you here you will die, and I would rather not have that on my conscience." The orc woman's eyes narrowed. "Why would you care? Your kind hates mine." "I am not my kind," Owen said simply. "I am just Owen, and I am the only person here, so you will have to make do with me." He began to uncoil the rope, looking for a solid anchor point. There was a thick willow tree about 15 feet back from the bank, its roots deep and strong. He looped the rope around it twice and knotted it securely, then tied the other end around his own waist. "When I get close enough, I am going to grab you. The mud will not want to let go, so it is going to hurt, and you are going to have to trust me." "I do not trust humans." "Fair enough," Owen said, wading into the shallows at the edge of the mud bank. "But right now, I am all you have got." The mud tried to claim him too, sucking at his boots with each step, but he had learned how to move in it over the years, distributing his weight and moving slowly. When he got close enough, he reached out and grasped the orc woman's free arm just above the elbow. Her skin was cold and slick, and the muscle beneath was corded and strong. Up close, he could see the exhaustion in her face, the way her lips were tinged faintly blue, and he realized she had probably been trapped since well before dawn, maybe even since the night before. "What is your name?" he asked, because it seemed important to know if he was going to pull her out. She hesitated, then said, "Kira. Kira Paxton." "All right, Kira. I am going to count to 3 and then I am going to pull. You push with whatever you have got left, understand?" She nodded, and he saw her jaw set with determination. He counted, and on 3 he hauled backward with all his strength. The mud made an obscene sucking sound and held fast. Kira gasped, and he felt her push, her free arm straining. He pulled again, leaning back, using the rope as an anchor, and this time he felt her shift just a little. Encouraged, he adjusted his grip and pulled again and slowly, inch by agonizing inch, the mud began to release her. When her trapped arm came free, she nearly sobbed with relief, and Owen quickly repositioned, wrapping both his arms around her torso from behind and dragging her backward. The mud released her legs with a final reluctant slurp, and they both went sprawling on the firmer ground at the edge of the bank, covered head to toe in stinking river mud and breathing hard. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Owen could feel Kira's heart hammering against his forearm where it was still wrapped across her chest, and he could hear her ragged breathing. Slowly, he released her and sat up, wiping mud from his face. Kira rolled onto her side, then pushed herself up to her hands and knees, coughing and spitting out muddy water. "Thank you," she said finally, the words seeming to cost her something. "You are welcome," Owen replied, getting to his feet and offering her a hand. She looked at it for a long moment, then took it and he pulled her upright. She swayed and he steadied her with a hand on her elbow. "Can you walk?" "I think so. My house is not far. You need to get warm and clean or you are going to get sick." Kira looked at him with suspicion. "Why would you bring me to your home?" "Because it is the decent thing to do," Owen said, with a patience he did not entirely feel. He was cold too and covered in mud, and his morning routine was completely destroyed, but none of that mattered as much as getting this woman somewhere safe. "You can leave whenever you want, but at least let me give you a chance to warm up and get the mud off." She studied him for another long moment, then nodded slowly. "Very well." Owen retrieved his rope and basket, and they began the walk back to his homestead. Kira moved stiffly, and he could see her favoring her left leg, but she kept up without complaint. The fog was starting to lift as the sun rose higher, and by the time they reached his property, the morning was bright and clear. His home was a modest structure, a single-room cabin with a loft for sleeping, a stone fireplace, and a small barn for his 2 goats and handful of chickens. It was not much, but it was his, built with his own hands after he had left the army and decided he wanted nothing more to do with the wars and the killing. He led Kira inside and immediately set about building up the fire, which had burned down to embers overnight. Once it was blazing again, he filled a large pot with water from the barrel by the door and set it to heat. Kira stood awkwardly near the entrance, dripping mud onto his floor, and Owen realized she had no idea what to expect from him. "There is a screen in the corner," he said, pointing. "You can get out of those wet clothes behind it. I will find you something dry to wear while yours are drying." "You want me to undress in your home?" Kira's voice was flat, but Owen heard the tension underneath. "I want you to not freeze to death," Owen said bluntly. "I will stay on this side of the room, and I will keep my back turned. I am not interested in anything except making sure you do not die of cold." Kira studied him again, and he wondered what she saw. He was not a particularly imposing man, just average height and build, with dark hair that was starting to gray at the temples even though he was only 32. His face was weathered from years of outdoor living, and his hands were calloused from work. He had a scar that ran from his left eyebrow into his hairline, a souvenir from a battle he tried not to think about, but otherwise he was unremarkable. Finally, Kira moved behind the screen. Owen heard the wet slap of clothing hitting the floor, and he busied himself with laying out clean towels and digging through his trunk for something that might fit her. He settled on one of his larger shirts and a pair of trousers with a drawstring waist, along with thick wool socks. He set them on the chair near the screen and announced their presence, then turned back to tend the fire. When Kira emerged, she looked smaller somehow, less intimidating without her mud-caked gear. The shirt hung loosely on her frame, and she had rolled up the sleeves, revealing forearms that were indeed muscular and marked with old scars. Her feet were bare despite the socks he had provided, and he noticed her toenails were dark, almost black. Her hair, now that it was merely damp instead of soaked, proved to be a deep brown shot through with hints of copper, and it fell past her shoulders in thick waves. "Sit by the fire," Owen said, gesturing to the bench he had positioned in front of the hearth. "I am going to clean up, and then I will make us something to eat." He took his own change of clothes and went outside to the pump, where he stripped down and doused himself with icy water, scrubbing away the worst of the mud as quickly as he could. The cold was brutal, but it was also bracing, and it helped clear his head. When he was reasonably clean, he dressed in dry clothes and went back inside, hanging his muddy things on pegs by the door next to Kira's. Kira had not moved from the bench, and she was staring into the fire with an expression he could not quite read. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, and he noticed they were shaking slightly. Shock, probably, combined with exhaustion and the aftermath of fear. Owen moved quietly around the kitchen area, setting a pan on the fire and slicing bread and cheese. He had smoked ham from last week's butchering, and he cut thick slices of that as well, laying them in the pan to sizzle. The smell filled the cabin, warm and savory, and he saw Kira's nose twitch. When everything was ready, he loaded 2 plates and brought them over, offering one to her. "Eat," he said simply. Kira took the plate but did not immediately start eating. "Why are you doing this?" "Because you need help and I can give it. That is not how the world works." "Maybe not," Owen agreed, sitting down on the other end of the bench with his own plate. "But it is how my world works, here on this homestead. I do not have much use for the way things are done in the towns and villages. That is why I live out here." Kira finally took a bite of the bread and cheese, and Owen saw her eyes close briefly in appreciation. She must have been starving. He ate his own meal in silence, giving her space, and when both their plates were empty, he took them to the wash basin and cleaned them, then poured 2 cups of hot tea from the pot that had been steeping. "How did you end up in the Mudbank?" he asked, handing her a cup. Kira wrapped her hands around it, absorbing the warmth. "I was traveling at night. I did not see the mud in the dark, and by the time I realized what I had walked into, it was too late. I tried to get out, but it only pulled me deeper. I thought I would die there." "Where were you traveling to?" She hesitated, then said, "Anywhere but where I came from." Owen recognized the tone of someone who did not want to elaborate, and he let it drop. He had his own secrets, his own reasons for living alone on the edge of the wilderness, and he was not about to pry into hers. "You are welcome to stay until you are fully recovered. It is the least I can do. I will not impose on your hospitality longer than necessary. It is not an imposition." Kira looked at him, her amber eyes searching his face. "You are strange, Owen Yates." "So I have been told," he said with a slight smile. "Rest now. You have been through an ordeal and you need to recover your strength." He expected her to argue, but instead, she simply nodded and set down her empty cup. Owen showed her to the loft, where his bed was made up with quilts his mother had sent him years ago. Kira climbed the ladder slowly, her movements stiff, and he heard the creak of the bed frame as she lay down. Within minutes, her breathing had evened out into the rhythm of sleep. Owen returned to the main room and looked at the muddy clothes hanging by the door. He took them outside and did his best to clean them, scrubbing the leather and wool until his hands were raw, then hanging everything on the line to dry. The day was warm enough that they would be ready by evening. He spent the rest of the morning tending to his goats and chickens, checking the garden, and finally making his way back to the river to check those fish traps. He had lost half the morning to the rescue, but he did not regret it. When he returned to the cabin in the early afternoon, Kira was awake and sitting at the small table, looking out the window. She turned when he entered, and he thought she looked a little less haunted than she had that morning. "How are you feeling?" he asked, setting down the basket of fish he had collected. "Sore, tired, but better." "Good." He began to prepare the fish for dinner, gutting and cleaning them with practiced efficiency. "Your clothes are drying outside. They should be ready by tonight." "Thank you." Kira paused, then added, "I will leave in the morning if that is acceptable." Owen looked up from his work. "You can stay longer if you need to. I do not want to be a burden." "You are not a burden," Owen said firmly, "but if you want to leave, I will not stop you. Where will you go?" Kira's expression closed off. "I will find somewhere." Owen decided not to push. He finished preparing the fish and set them to cook, then washed his hands and sat down across from her. "Can I ask you something?" "You can ask." "Why were you traveling alone at night?" "It is dangerous, even for someone as strong as you clearly are." Kira was silent for a long moment, then said, "I left my clan. I could not stay there anymore, and I could not leave during the day without being stopped, so I waited until dark and slipped away." "Why did you leave?" "Because they wanted me to do something I could not do." She looked away, her jaw tight. "They wanted me to raid a human settlement, to kill, to burn, to prove my loyalty to the clan, but I do not want that life. I do not want to hurt people who have done nothing to me. So I refused, and my father said I was a coward and a traitor, and I knew if I stayed they would force me, or they would cast me out anyway. So I left on my own terms." Owen felt something twist in his chest. He had seen the aftermath of orc raids during his time in the army, had fought against war parties, and seen good men die. But he had also seen what the human armies did to orc villages, the way they justified every atrocity in the name of defense and security. It was all blood and hatred, and it never ended, and that was why he had walked away. "That took courage," he said quietly, "to stand against your own people like that." Kira looked at him, surprise flickering in her eyes. "Most humans would say I am lying. That orcs are incapable of mercy or compassion." "Most humans are idiots," Owen said bluntly. "Myself included most of the time, but I try to judge people by their actions, not by what I have been told to believe about them, and your actions tell me you are a good person." Kira's expression softened, just a little. "You are indeed a strange man, Owen Yates." They ate dinner together as the sun set, and afterward Kira helped him clean up despite his protests. When her clothes were dry, she changed back into them behind the screen, and Owen pretended not to notice the way his shirt and trousers were neatly folded and left on the chair, as though she wanted to leave no trace of herself behind. That night, Owen insisted she take the bed again, and he made himself a pallet on the floor by the fire. He lay awake for a long time, listening to the sounds of the cabin settling and the faint whisper of Kira's breathing from the loft, and he wondered what would happen in the morning when she left. He told himself it did not matter, that she was just someone he had helped, and that he would probably never see her again. But there was a small, traitorous part of him that hoped he was wrong. When Owen woke in the morning, the cabin was silent, and when he climbed the ladder to the loft, the bed was empty and neatly made. His heart sank, and he descended quickly, looking around for any sign of Kira. But the cabin was empty, and when he opened the door, he saw that her boots were gone from the peg where they had been drying. She had left without saying goodbye. Owen told himself it was for the best. She had her own path to walk, and he had his, and there was no reason for those paths to intersect again. He went about his morning routine mechanically, checking the traps, feeding the animals, working in the garden. But the cabin felt emptier than it had before, and he found himself listening for sounds that did not come. 3 days passed, and Owen tried to put Kira out of his mind. He had work to do, and winter was coming eventually, and he needed to make sure he was prepared. But on the fourth morning, when he went out to check the traps, he found her sitting on the riverbank near the spot where he had pulled her from the mud, her knees drawn up to her chest, and her arms wrapped around them. She looked up when she heard him approach, and he saw wariness and something that might have been hope in her expression. "I came back," she said, as though that explained everything. Owen sat down beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them. "I can see that." I tried to keep going. "I walked for 3 days, sleeping in the woods, avoiding the roads. But I kept thinking about what you said, about judging people by their actions. And I realized I had nowhere to go, no plan, no purpose. I was just running. And then I thought about your cabin and the way you helped me without asking for anything in return, and I wondered if maybe I could have that too. A place, a purpose." She looked at him, and her amber eyes were bright. "I do not expect you to take me in. I know I am asking for too much. But I had to come back and ask because I cannot stop thinking about the possibility." Owen felt his heart do something complicated in his chest. "What are you asking exactly?" "I am asking if I can stay. If I can work for you, help you with your homestead. I am strong and I can learn. I will not be a burden, I promise. I just need a place to be, somewhere I can figure out who I am without my clan telling me." Owen looked at her, at the determination in the set of her jaw and the vulnerability in her eyes, and he made a decision that he knew would change everything. "Yes," he said simply. "You can stay." Kira's eyes widened. "Truly, truly. But there are conditions. You pull your own weight, which I think you will have no trouble doing. You are honest with me, and I will be honest with you, and if you decide you want to leave, you leave. No drama, no guilt. You are free to go whenever you want. I agree to your conditions." Owen stood and offered her his hand. "Then welcome to the homestead, Kira Paxton." She took his hand and let him pull her to her feet, and he thought he saw the ghost of a smile on her lips. They walked back to the cabin together, and Owen found himself looking forward to the future in a way he had not in a very long time. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that surprised Owen with how natural it felt. Kira proved to be a tireless worker, taking on tasks that would have taken him hours and completing them in half the time. She repaired the fence around the garden that had been sagging for months, rethatched a section of the barn roof that had been leaking, and even managed to convince his stubborn goat, Daisy, to actually cooperate during milking, something Owen had never been able to do. In return, Owen taught her the things she did not know: how to preserve food for the winter, how to read the weather in the clouds and the way the animals behaved, how to set snares for rabbits and check them without disturbing the surrounding forest. Kira learned quickly, absorbing information like a sponge, and Owen found himself enjoying the role of teacher more than he had expected. They developed an easy companionship, working side by side during the day and sharing meals in the evening. Kira was not much of a talker, but when she did speak, her observations were often sharp and occasionally funny in a dry way that caught Owen off guard. He learned that she had a younger brother she worried about, still with the clan, and that her mother had died when she was young. She learned that Owen had served in the king's army for 10 years before deserting, and that he had nightmares sometimes about the things he had seen and done. Neither of them talked about these things often, but the knowledge was there, a foundation of shared understanding. They were both people who had walked away from the lives they were supposed to lead, and they were both trying to build something new in the ruins. A month passed, and then another. Summer gave way to autumn, and the leaves turned gold and red and orange. Owen found himself increasingly aware of Kira's presence in ways that made him uncomfortable. He noticed the way she hummed while she worked, a low, tuneless sound that was somehow soothing. He noticed the way she tilted her head when she was thinking, and the way her tusks caught the light. He noticed the strength in her hands and the gentleness with which she handled the baby chicks that hatched in late September. He told himself it was just loneliness, that he had been alone for too long, and his mind was playing tricks on him. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. He was starting to care for Kira in a way that went beyond friendship or companionship, and that terrified him. Owen had no illusions about how the world worked. Humans and orcs did not have relationships, not real ones. There were stories, of course, whispered tales of forbidden love and tragic endings, but those were just stories. In reality, a human man and an orc woman together would be seen as an abomination by both their peoples. Kira would be cast out even more thoroughly than she already had been, and Owen would be branded a traitor and worse. So he kept his feelings to himself and tried to maintain the careful distance they had established. But it was getting harder. One evening in early October, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Kira asked him a question that caught him completely off guard. "Have you ever been in love, Owen?" Owen looked up from the piece of wood he had been carving, a small bird that was starting to take shape under his knife. "Why do you ask?" Kira shrugged, staring into the flames. "I have been thinking about my life, about the things I never had because I was always focused on being what my clan wanted me to be. I never had time for courtship or romance. I never let myself think about those things. But now, here, I find myself wondering what it would be like." Owen set down his carving, his heart beating faster than he would have liked. "I was in love once. A long time ago, before I joined the army. Her name was Eliza, and she was the blacksmith's daughter in my village. We were going to get married, but then the war started and I enlisted, and by the time I came back on leave 2 years later, she had married someone else. I do not blame her. She could not wait forever." "You still love her?" "No," Owen said honestly. "I think I stopped loving her somewhere in the middle of all the fighting and dying. It is hard to hold onto something soft and gentle when you are surrounded by blood and screaming. I think that part of me got buried somewhere, and I am not sure I ever dug it back up." Kira was quiet for a moment, then said, "I think you did dig it back up. I think it is here in this place you built, in the way you tend your garden and care for your animals. I think you are more whole than you believe." Owen felt something catch in his throat. "Why do you say that?" "Because you saved me," Kira said simply. "Not just from the mud, but from the emptiness of having no purpose. You gave me a place to be, and you never made me feel like I owed you anything for it. That is not the action of a broken man. That is the action of someone who still believes in goodness." Owen did not know what to say to that, so he said nothing. They sat in silence, and the fire crackled between them, and Owen wondered if Kira could hear his heart hammering in his chest. The first snow came in mid-November, earlier than usual, and it blanketed the valley in white. Owen and Kira worked together to make sure the animals were secure, and the cabin was properly insulated, stuffing gaps with moss and mud and hanging heavy blankets over the windows at night. The woodpile they had spent the autumn building was stacked high against the side of the barn, enough to last through even the harshest winter. On the first truly cold night, when the wind howled outside and the temperature dropped below freezing, Owen insisted that Kira sleep downstairs by the fire instead of in the loft, where the heat did not reach as well. He set up a second pallet, and they lay on opposite sides of the hearth, cocooned in quilts and blankets. Owen could not sleep. He was too aware of Kira's presence, of the sound of her breathing and the occasional rustle as she shifted in her sleep. The fire cast dancing shadows on the ceiling, and he watched them play across the beams, trying to quiet his mind. "Owen," Kira's voice was soft in the darkness. "Are you awake?" "Yes. Can I ask you something?" "Of course." There was a long pause, and then Kira said, "Do you ever regret letting me stay?" Owen turned his head to look at her. In the firelight he could see her profile, the curve of her cheek and the line of her jaw. "No, never. Why would you think that?" "Because I have disrupted your life. You were content here alone, and then I came along and changed everything." "You did change everything," Owen agreed. "But not in a bad way. This place is better with you in it, Kira. I am better with you in it." He heard her breath catch, and then she said, "I feel the same way about you." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning, and Owen felt his heart race. He knew he should say something, should acknowledge what was happening, but he was afraid. Afraid of rejection, afraid of what it would mean if she felt the same way he did, afraid of the world and what it would do to them. In the end, he said nothing, and eventually, the silence stretched too long and Kira turned over, facing away from him. Owen lay awake for hours after that, cursing himself for his cowardice. Winter deepened, and the snow piled higher. There were days when it was too cold to do anything but huddle by the fire and wait for the storm to pass. On those days, Owen taught Kira to read, using the handful of books he owned, and she taught him words in the orc language, the harsh guttural sounds that somehow became beautiful when she spoke them. They played card games with a worn deck Owen had brought from his army days, and Kira proved to be ruthlessly competitive, crowing with delight when she won and sulking dramatically when she lost. Owen found himself laughing more than he had in years, and the cabin felt warm and alive in a way it never had before. But the tension between them was still there, unspoken and growing. Owen caught Kira looking at him sometimes when she thought he was not paying attention, and the expression on her face made his chest ache. He knew he should say something, should address the thing that was building between them, but every time he tried, the words died in his throat. It was Kira who finally broke the stalemate, in the most unexpected way possible. They were outside on a rare clear day in late December, digging a path to the barn through snow that came up to their knees. Owen was in front, breaking the trail, and Kira was behind him, widening it and packing down the sides. They were almost to the barn door when Owen's shovel hit a patch of ice hidden beneath the snow, and his feet went out from under him. He went down hard, landing on his back, and the impact knocked the wind out of him. Kira was beside him in an instant, dropping to her knees in the snow, her hands on his shoulders. "Owen, are you hurt?" Owen gasped, trying to get his lungs to work again, and then finally managed to suck in a breath. "I am fine," he wheezed. "Just had the air knocked out of me." Kira's face was very close to his, her amber eyes wide with concern, and Owen could see the crystals of frost clinging to her eyelashes. Without thinking, without giving himself time to be afraid, he reached up and cupped her cheek with his hand. Her skin was cold from the winter air, but it warmed under his palm and she went very still. "Kira," he said, his voice rough, "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "I think I am falling in love with you." "No, that is not right. I think I have already fallen. I have been trying not to, because I know it is complicated and dangerous and probably a terrible idea, but I cannot seem to stop myself. And if you do not feel the same way, I understand, and we can pretend I never said anything, but I needed you to know." Kira stared at him, her expression unreadable, and Owen felt his heart sink. He had ruined everything. She was going to leave, and he was going to be alone again, and it was his own stupid fault. But then Kira smiled, a real, genuine smile that lit up her whole face, and she said, "You are an idiot, Owen Yates." Before he could process that, she leaned down and kissed him. Her lips were cold at first, but they warmed quickly, and Owen felt like he was melting into the snow beneath him. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her closer, and she made a small sound of surprise and pleasure. The kiss was clumsy and desperate and perfect, and when they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. "I have been waiting for you to say something for months," Kira said, her forehead resting against his. "I was starting to think you were never going to." "I was afraid," Owen admitted. "I did not want to ruin what we had." "You could never ruin it," Kira said fiercely. "You are the best thing that has ever happened to me, Owen. I love you too." They lay there in the snow for a long moment, just holding each other, and Owen felt something inside him that had been tightly wound for years finally relax. He had found something he had thought was lost forever: the ability to feel joy, to hope, to love. Eventually, they got up and finished clearing the path to the barn, but everything felt different now, lighter somehow. When they went back inside, they shed their snow-covered outer layers and stood by the fire to warm up, and Owen pulled Kira into his arms and kissed her again, slowly this time, savoring it. "What do we do now?" Kira asked, her hands resting on his chest. "I have no idea," Owen admitted. "But we will figure it out together." And they did. Over the weeks that followed, they navigated the new dimension of their relationship with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. They were both aware of the implications, of the fact that they were crossing a line that society said should not be crossed. But they were also both people who had already rejected society's rules, and they decided that this was just one more rule they were willing to break. The physical intimacy developed slowly, carefully, with both of them aware that they were each other's first in this context. Owen had been with women before, but never someone he loved the way he loved Kira, and Kira had never been with anyone at all. They learned each other's bodies with patience and curiosity, and if there were awkward moments, they laughed through them and tried again. The emotional intimacy was easier and harder at the same time. They had already built a foundation of trust and understanding, but now they were building something even deeper, something that required vulnerability in a way neither of them was used to. They talked late into the night, sharing fears and dreams, and they held each other through the nightmares that sometimes came. Winter began to loosen its grip as February arrived, and the days grew gradually longer. Owen started to think about the spring planting, about expanding the garden now that there would be two of them working it full time. He mentioned this to Kira one evening, and she got a strange look on her face. "What is it?" he asked. "I was just thinking," Kira said slowly, "about the future. About what happens when winter ends and people start traveling again. About what happens if someone comes here and sees us together." Owen had been thinking about the same thing, though he had been trying not to. "We will deal with it if it happens. But what will we say? How will we explain?" "We will tell the truth," Owen said firmly. "That you live here, that you help me run the homestead, and that we are together. And if people have a problem with that, they can leave." Kira looked at him, her eyes searching his face. "You would really stand against your own people for me?" "You are my people now," Owen said simply. "You and me, that is what matters." Kira kissed him then, and he tasted salt and realized she was crying. He held her and let her cry, understanding that these were not tears of sadness but of relief, of finally believing that she was truly safe and wanted. The first test came in early March, when a traveling merchant made his way up the valley road, his cart laden with goods to sell to the scattered homesteaders. Owen had been expecting him, as the merchant came through twice a year like clockwork, and he had made a list of supplies they needed. But he had not expected the man to arrive so early, and he definitely had not expected him to arrive while Kira was outside, very visibly tending the goats. The merchant, a portly man named Garrett, pulled his cart to a stop in front of the cabin and stared at Kira with undisguised shock. Kira froze, her hand still on Daisy's collar, and Owen, who had been inside organizing the coins for the purchase, came out quickly. "Garrett," he said evenly, walking over to stand between the merchant and Kira. "You are early this year." Garrett tore his eyes away from Kira and looked at Owen with a mixture of confusion and suspicion. "Owen, I did not expect to see you keeping company with an orc." "Kira lives here," Owen said, his voice calm but with an edge of steel underneath. "She works the homestead with me." "Is that going to be a problem?" Garrett's eyes narrowed. "Depends on what you mean by works with you. If you are just using her for labor, then I suppose it is your business. But if you mean something else—" "I mean that she is my partner," Owen said flatly, "in every sense of the word. And if you have a problem with that, you can turn your cart around and leave." The merchant looked between Owen and Kira, his expression a mix of disgust and disbelief. "You are betting an orc. Have you lost your mind?" Owen felt anger flare hot in his chest, but before he could respond, Kira stepped forward, her chin lifted defiantly. "I am standing right here," she said, her voice cold. "If you have something to say about me, say it to my face." Garrett looked at her, and for a moment, Owen thought the man was going to do something stupid. But then Garrett seemed to remember that Kira was a head taller than him and likely twice as strong, and he swallowed hard. "I am just saying, it is not natural. Humans and orcs do not mix." "Everyone knows that." "Everyone is wrong," Owen said. "Now, are you going to sell me the supplies I need, or are you going to leave?" Garrett hesitated, clearly torn between his prejudice and his desire to make a sale. In the end, commerce won out, as Owen had suspected it would. "Fine. But do not expect me to keep quiet about this. Word is going to spread." "Let it," Owen said. "I have nothing to hide." They completed the transaction in tense silence, and when Garrett finally drove his cart away, Owen let out a breath he had not realized he had been holding. Kira came to stand beside him, and they watched the merchant disappear down the road. "That could have gone worse," Kira said quietly. "It could have gone better too," Owen replied. "He is going to tell everyone he meets. Are you afraid of what they will do?" Owen turned to look at her, taking in the worry in her eyes and the set of her shoulders. "I am afraid of them trying to hurt you. I am not afraid of them judging me. I stopped caring about that a long time ago." Kira took his hand and squeezed it. "We will face whatever comes together." "Together," Owen agreed. Word did spread, just as Garrett had promised. Over the next few weeks they had a series of visitors, some curious, some hostile. A few of the other homesteaders stopped by under the guise of borrowing tools or asking advice, but Owen knew they were really there to gawk at Kira. He tolerated it because most of them were at least polite, if awkwardly so. But then there were the others. A group of young men from the nearest village, full of bravado and beer, rode up to the cabin one evening and started shouting insults and threats. Owen came out with his old army sword strapped to his side, and Kira came out with a pitchfork, and together they stood on the porch and stared the men down until they got tired of yelling and rode away. An older woman, wife of one of the village elders, stopped by to inform Owen that he was a disgrace to humanity and that he would burn in the hells for his perversion. Owen listened politely until she ran out of breath, then thanked her for her concern and closed the door in her face. Through it all, Owen and Kira stood together, weathering the storm of judgment and hatred with a stubborn resilience. It was exhausting and infuriating, but it also brought them closer, forging their bond in the fire of adversity. Spring arrived in full, and Owen and Kira threw themselves into the work of planting. They expanded the garden significantly, clearing new ground and building raised beds. Kira proved to have a natural gift for working with the soil, and under her care, the plants seemed to thrive. They also acquired a cow from a farmer who was moving away and willing to sell for a reasonable price, which meant they would have milk and butter and cheese in abundance. The homestead was flourishing, and so were they. Owen had never been happier, and he could see the same contentment in Kira's face when she smiled at him across the dinner table or when they lay together at night, talking about their plans for the future. But the peace did not last. In late April, a group of orc warriors appeared at the edge of the property. There were 5 of them, all male, all armed, and they did not look friendly. Owen saw them first and immediately called for Kira, who was in the barn. She came running, and when she saw the orcs, her face went pale. "That is my brother," she said, pointing to the youngest of the group, a broad-shouldered orc with the same copper tint to his hair that Kira had. "And those are warriors from my clan." Owen's hand went to the hilt of his sword, but Kira put a hand on his arm. "Wait, let me talk to them." They walked out to meet the orcs together, and as they got closer, Owen could see the mixture of emotions on the young orc's face: relief, anger, confusion. The other warriors just looked hostile. "Kira," the young orc said, and his voice cracked slightly. "We have been searching for you for months. Father said you were dead, but I knew he was lying. I knew you had just run away." "Hello, Kellen," Kira said quietly. "I did run away. I am sorry I did not say goodbye." "You left me there alone," Kellen said, and there was pain in his voice. "You left me to deal with Father's rage and the clan's shame." "I know. And I am sorry for that too, but I could not stay. You know why." One of the older warriors stepped forward, his hand on his weapon. "Enough of this. You are coming back with us, Kira. The clan has declared you outcast, but your father is willing to take you back if you renounce your cowardice and swear to serve." "I am not going back," Kira said firmly. "I have a life here now, a good life." The warrior looked at Owen with open contempt. "With this human, you disgrace yourself and your bloodline." Owen felt his temper flare, but he kept his voice level. "She is not going anywhere unless she wants to, and I think she has made it clear that she does not want to go with you." "You have no say in this, human," another warrior growled. "This is clan business." "It is my business when you come onto my property and threaten the woman I love," Owen shot back. That caused a ripple of shock among the orcs, and Kellen's eyes widened. "Love? You love him?" He was looking at Kira now, and his expression was a mix of disbelief and something that might have been betrayal. "Yes," Kira said, lifting her chin. "I love him and he loves me. This is my home now, Kellen. I am not going back to the clan, and I am not going back to that life." The lead warrior sneered. "Then you are truly outcast. You will have no clan, no family, no place among our people." "I already have a family," Kira said, and she reached out and took Owen's hand. "I already have a place." Kellen looked between them, and Owen saw the pain in the young orc's eyes. "I do not understand," he said quietly. "How can you choose him over your own blood?" "Because he sees me as a person, not a weapon," Kira said gently. "Because he respects my choices and my voice. Because he makes me happy in a way I never was in the clan." "I love you, Kellen, and I will always be your sister, but I cannot live the life Father wants for me. I hope someday you will understand that." Kellen stared at her for a long moment, and then his shoulders sagged. "I do not understand, but I do not want to fight you." He looked at the other warriors. "We should go. She has made her choice." The lead warrior looked like he wanted to argue, but after a tense moment he nodded curtly. "Very well. But know this, Kira Paxton, you are no longer one of us. If we meet again, you will be treated as a stranger." "I understand," Kira said, and Owen heard the sadness in her voice. The warriors turned and began to walk away, but Kellen hesitated. He looked back at Kira, and for a moment, Owen thought he might say something, but in the end, he just nodded once and followed the others into the forest. When they were gone, Kira let out a shaky breath and sagged against Owen. He wrapped his arms around her and held her while she cried, her tears soaking into his shirt. He did not try to tell her it would be okay, because he knew it would not entirely. She had just lost her family, her people, and even though it had been her choice, it still hurt. They stood there for a long time, and when Kira finally pulled back, her eyes were red but her expression was resolute. "I do not regret it," she said. "I want you to know that. I do not regret choosing you." "I know," Owen said, kissing her forehead, "and I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never do." The encounter with the orc warriors marked a turning point. It was as though the universe had been testing them, seeing if they would break under the pressure, and they had proven that they would not. In the weeks that followed, they stopped worrying so much about what other people thought and focused on building their life together. They worked hard, and the homestead thrived. The garden produced more than they could eat, so they started selling the surplus at the market in the nearest village, enduring the stares and whispers because the coin was good and they needed it. Slowly, very slowly, some people began to accept them, or at least to tolerate them. There was a young couple, newly married, who started greeting them warmly at the market, and an old farmer who told Owen that he had always thought the prejudice against orcs was nonsense and good for Owen for not giving in to it. It was not much, but it was something. Summer came, hot and bright, and one evening in early July, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the valley, Owen turned to Kira and said, "Marry me." Kira looked at him, startled. "What, marry me?" Owen repeated. "I know it will not be legal, and I know we cannot go to a priest or a magistrate, but I want to make a commitment to you in front of whatever gods or spirits might be listening. I want to promise you that I will be yours for the rest of my life, and I want you to promise me the same. So marry me, Kira Paxton." Kira stared at him, and then a slow smile spread across her face. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you, Owen Yates." They married each other a week later at dawn on the spot where he had pulled her from the mudbank all those months ago. It seemed fitting, symbolic somehow, that they should bind their lives together in the place where their story had begun. They wrote their own vows, speaking them to each other as the sun rose over the valley, and they exchanged rings that Owen had fashioned from silver coins, melted down and shaped with painstaking care. There were no witnesses, no official to sanction the union, but it did not matter. They spoke their promises to each other and to the world, and when they kissed, Owen felt like he was the luckiest man alive. They celebrated with a simple meal and a bottle of wine Owen had been saving for a special occasion. And that night, they made love under the stars, wrapped in blankets and each other. And Owen knew with absolute certainty that this was where he was meant to be. The months that followed were the best of Owen's life. He and Kira worked together, laughed together, planned for the future together. They talked about expanding the homestead, maybe building a second cabin or a larger barn. They talked about the possibility of having children someday, though they both knew that would bring its own challenges. But they also knew that they could face anything as long as they were together. Autumn arrived again, and with it came the first anniversary of the day Owen had found Kira stuck in the mudbank. They marked the occasion by returning to that spot again, standing hand in hand and looking out over the river that had brought them together. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if you had not come by that morning?" Kira asked. "Yes," Owen said quietly, "and I do not like those thoughts. I am very glad I did come by." "So am I," Kira said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "You saved my life, Owen, in more ways than one." "You saved mine too," Owen replied. "I was just existing before you came along, going through the motions. You gave me a reason to really live again." They stood there in silence for a while, watching the water flow past, and then Kira said, "I have something to tell you." Owen looked at her, hearing something in her tone that made his heart beat faster. "What is it?" Kira turned to face him, taking both his hands in hers. "I am pregnant." Owen felt like the world had stopped. "You are certain?" "Yes. I have been sure for a few weeks now, but I wanted to be absolutely certain before I told you." Owen let out a whoop of joy and swept Kira up in his arms, spinning her around while she laughed. When he set her down, he kissed her thoroughly, and then he dropped to his knees and pressed his forehead against her still flat belly. "Hello in there," he said softly. "I am your father, and I cannot wait to meet you." Kira ran her fingers through his hair, and when Owen looked up, he saw that she was crying, but she was smiling too. "Are you happy?" she asked. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Owen said, getting to his feet and pulling her into his arms. "I am terrified and ecstatic and overwhelmed, and I love you so much I cannot even put it into words." "I love you too," Kira whispered. "And we are going to be good parents, I know we are." And they were. When their daughter was born the following spring, a beautiful little girl with her mother's green skin and her father's dark hair, they named her Alara, which meant new beginning in the old language. She was perfect and healthy, and Owen and Kira fell in love with her instantly. Raising a half-orc child in a world that was not always kind to difference was challenging, but Owen and Kira faced it the same way they had faced everything else, together. They taught Alara to be proud of who she was, to stand up for herself, and to judge people by their actions rather than their words. They taught her to be kind and strong and true. And slowly, very slowly, the world around them began to change. Other mixed couples, emboldened by Owen and Kira's example, began to come forward. A human woman and an orc man moved to the valley and started a farm of their own. A half-orc trader started coming through regularly, and people got used to seeing him and stopped staring. It was not a revolution, but it was progress, and that was something. Years passed, and the homestead grew. Owen and Kira built a larger house to accommodate their growing family, as Alara was eventually joined by a brother and then a sister. They expanded their land and hired workers, both human and orc, treating them all fairly and paying them well. Their farm became known for its quality produce and its welcoming atmosphere, and people came from all over the valley to trade with them. Owen's hair went fully gray, and Kira developed laugh lines around her eyes, but they remained as much in love as they had been on that day by the Mudbank. They still held hands when they walked, still kissed each other goodbye every morning, still talked late into the night about their dreams and fears. On their 20th anniversary, they returned once more to the place where it had all begun. Their children were grown now, Alara married to a kind orc man and expecting her first child, the younger two off pursuing their own paths. Owen and Kira stood by the riverbank, older and grayer but no less devoted to each other. "You remember what you said to me that first day?" Kira asked. "When I told you not to come closer," Owen smiled. "I said I was going to help you anyway because I did not want your death on my conscience. And I am very glad you did," Kira said, turning to face him. "You gave me everything, Owen. A home, a family, a life worth living. I do not know what I did to deserve you, but I thank every god and spirit I can think of that you were there that morning." "I was exactly where I was meant to be," Owen said, pulling her into his arms. "And so were you. We were meant to find each other, Kira. I truly believe that." They kissed, and the river flowed past them, eternal and unchanging, and Owen knew that whatever else happened, whatever challenges the future might bring, they would face it together. They always had, and they always would. Because he had found her stuck in the mudbank at dawn, and pulled the orc woman onto solid ground, and in doing so, he had found himself as well.